In 1919, the world emerged from the most devastating conflict humanity had ever seen. The primary goal was to ensure the guns of such a war never fired again, but the resulting Treaty of Versailles acted as a punitive mandate rather than a lasting peace agreement. This chart visualizes the scale of these fines, which far exceeded Germany's entire national economic output at the time. Alongside these debts, strict geographic restrictions stripped away the very territories and industrial resources Germany would have needed to actually pay those debts back. A peace agreement built on national humiliation and mathematically impossible debt doesn't resolve a conflict. It forces a population into a corner, creating a reservoir of resentment that remains dormant until the next crisis strikes. The immediate result of these restrictions was the total evaporation of the German economy. Hyperinflation reached a point where the national currency became essentially worthless, turning life savings into waste paper. You can see the result in the faces of this crowd outside a Berlin financial institution. They aren't just depositors, they are people who have lost their entire future, held back by police as the doors remain locked. While the 1920s offered a brief moment of recovery, the global financial crash of 1929 returned the country to a state of absolute ruin. Passive suffering finally turned into a focused public anger. When a population is stripped of both its survival and its dignity for a second time in a decade, they lose faith in moderate politics. This creates a dangerous psychological vacuum, where people become willing to trade their freedom for any promise of stability. This was the exact void Adolf Hitler recognized. He capitalized on the exhaustion of a society that felt abandoned by the rest of the world. He offered the desperate public a simple, powerful narrative, a return to national strength and the reclamation of the dignity they had lost. His platform specifically targeted the physical losses of 1919, promising to take back the territories that had been stripped away by international decree. He took the ambient anger of a starving population and channeled it into a state-sponsored spirit of revenge, turning domestic suffering into an external threat. This trade was the turning point. Hitler offered a return to past glory, and in their desperation, the public granted him absolute power. With that power, he immediately violated the peace treaties through a massive, perfectly synchronized expansion of the German military. He then used this rebuilt force to begin aggressively seizing control of neighboring countries, expanding Germany's borders through intimidation. The definitive move occurred on September 1, 1939. This is the moment German soldiers physically dismantled the border crossings into Poland, launching a full-scale invasion. At this point, the illusion of peace was gone. Britain and France realized that diplomacy would not stop the expansion, leaving them no choice but to declare war on Germany. Aggressive territorial expansion can only go so far before it hits a boundary. That boundary is usually a global, catastrophic retaliation that no amount of national power can survive. The era of political buildup was over. World War II had moved from a threat to the reality of total war. This was not a quick campaign. It was a brutal conflict that dragged on for 6 relentless years, consuming every resource and every life it touched. The ultimate cost was the lives of tens of millions of people. These were the soldiers and civilians caught in the crossfire of a war that promised glory, but delivered only destruction. Compare this reality, millions dead and a continent in ruins, to the original promises of national prosperity. The path of revenge ended in a global graveyard. History shows us that unchecked power, once granted, almost always leads toward a destructive end. When nations frame their entire existence around a spirit of revenge, they create a trap for themselves that eventually becomes impossible to escape. Policies born from collective anger may feel like a solution in the short term, but they inevitably push the entire world toward mutual ruin. These stories from our past explain the modern world we live in today. Follow for more historical insights. Recognizing the warning signs in history is the only way to ensure the mistakes of the past stay in the past.